Hey guys, I'm Jathan with Action Water Sports, and I'm sitting here with Randy, and today we're going to talk about which boat engine type is best for your family on this episode of Action Answers. Let's take a look. To dive in, what are the primary types of boat engines? I know there's outboards, which you typically find on pontoons, inboards, which we sell Mastercraft, so those are going to have inboards in them, and then a boat like Cobalt, which is going to have an inboard outboard type of engine. I also know there's jet boats, but I think for today I specifically want to talk about just the primary three, just because we find those the most common. So with that being said, outboard engines, what can describe an outboard engine?
Yes, so to keep it simple on what an outboard engine is, it's literally the big housing unit hanging off the back of a boat.
Right.
Everything is compact right in there, and
like your transmission, your prop, your engine, all in that housing unit.
Hanging off the back of the boat, correct. Right. Typically we see them on our pontoon boats.
Yep.
Also you'll see them on center console boats as well, and the intercoastal, down in Florida,
Yep.
saltwater packages.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So an inboard outboard, what is that?
So an inboard outboard, you're gonna have the engine inside the boat in the back, and the drive system is actually off the back in the water.
Okay.
So when they talk about an IO, part of it's inside, part of it's out the back with the prop.
Got it. Okay. And you'll find it all the time in the back of the boat. Right?
Always in the back of the boat, correct.
Okay.
Sometimes you have one, two,
Yep.
depends on how big the boat is.
Gotcha. And then an inboard, tell me about that.
An inboard you're gonna have in the boat, so everything is there, your engine, your transmission, and then you'll have a shaft coming out of the boat, which then has a prop on it and a separate rudder deciding where the boat's gonna go.
And that's not directly hanging off the back of the boat, that prop and rudder.
Correct.
Where is that positioned?
Yeah, so an inboard is typically gonna be farther forward on the boat in the location compared to where an inboard outboard or an outboard will be.
Okay. Yeah, so that gives us a pretty good idea of the different types. So now that we know the different types, let's talk about the pros and cons of each, because they definitely all have their pros and cons. So let's start with an outboard. What's the pros and cons of an outboard engine?
Yeah, so the biggest pro, or a couple pros, would be an outboard engine can go in very shallow water. If you're on a pontoon, you can typically raise the engine up and beach it. Another very positive thing, it's a very quiet engine. So they used to be, we think of our grandparents' inboard or our grandparents' outboards, and they were loud, they're two-stroke, they smell, and now these new outboards are so quiet, so smooth, and they become very popular.
Yeah, and I think also if you're a do-it-yourselfer, I think those engines are a little more easier to work on.
They are.
In that case?
They are. The whole housing case comes right off the top,
right,
and it makes it very easy to service.
So cons of that, I know for sure one of the cons that comes off to my head is wake surfing.
Yes.
Or just water sports in general. You're probably a little more limited in that area with a outboard.
Correct. So you cannot wake surf behind an outboard. I would say one of the bigger concerns or con to it would be the platform. You will lose a full platform on the back of the boat when you have that big outboard in the middle.
Yeah.
And for that, if you're getting on, if you're putting a surf or a wakeboard on, or ski on the back, it's a little bit harder when you have an outboard.
And it's kind of an eyesore back there too.
Correct.
To some. If you cared about that.
Yeah, they're making them look sexier and better these days.
Right. Okay, so pros and cons of an inboard outboard. Let's go there.
So the pros and cons of an inboard outboard would be the depth of water. Those are going to draft the most. So when the drive is down on most inboard outboards, it's 40 inches of water. So it's just something to be aware of if you are in shallow water.
So benefit on the inboard outboard is also being able to trim.
Correct. So just like an outboard, an inboard outboard will be able to trim your drive up and down. This is good for getting into shallow water. Now, you can't trim it up as far as an outboard. So you're not going to be able to typically beach an inboard outboard. However, the ability to trim it up allows you to not hit your prop on hopefully any sand or rocks.
Right.
in situations on shallow lakes.
It just won't trim up as far as your outboard engine.
Correct.
Got it.
So another con would be the fact of just winterizing the boat and maintaining it. Compared to an outboard, it is inside, so some boats it's very hard to work on or to get into the tight spaces of the boat.
Yeah, for sure. So some of the pros would be, I know for when I think of an IO for myself, it almost has like a more sporty car-like feel.
It does. Another benefit or pro to it would be a lot of companies are now putting on dual props. So you have the benefit of having one engine with two props on the back.
That's a great point.
Which is going to allow you just to be quicker on plane, better performing.
Yeah. And do you think out of the three engines, as far as aftermarket parts goes, IOs probably offer the most aftermarket parts, or what would you say to that?
I would say based on the inboard outboards being around for a long time, that you can definitely get your hands on a lot of parts if you're a do-it-yourself person.
Yeah, absolutely. So an inboard, let's move to that. Pros and cons of an inboard.
Yeah, so we'll start with the cons. The first thing everyone will say is that it's a little bit more interesting or harder to drive an inboard.
Yeah, for sure.
When you back up an inboard, it typically wants to go in one direction, where when you have an inboard outboard or an outboard, you can control the boat better in reverse.
Yeah. So an inboard has a little more limited reverse options, is what you're saying.
It has a little bit more limited reverse options, but then also you just have to understand too, when you're driving it in slow speeds, it's a little bit more unique to put it at the dock.
Yeah.
You have to be in geared in order to make the drive system or the rudder go one direction or the other.
Right. But I think, just bringing up a pro here, I think a lot of people are willing to have that for an inboard because you get more water sports performance out of it.
For sure. And when you look at all three boats, it really comes down to what you're used to driving as well. So there isn't a bad option.
Right.
It's just getting comfortable with the style of boat you're driving, and it'll be easy for you to do.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there is a lot of pros when it comes to an inboard. And first off, it's going to be the ability to do more water sports behind the boat.
Yep.
And what's become very popular is the surfing.
Yeah.
Another just benefit as well is where the prop is located. When the prop is up underneath the boat, it's very safe for swimmers behind the boat
By the swim platform.
by the platform. Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. So, little Cindy or Johnny can just hop off that platform in the back, and you don't have to worry about them hitting the prop at all because the prop is nice and secure underneath the boat.
Correct. And of course, we're always going to preach, no matter what boat you're in, outboard, outboard, or inboard, turn off the engine.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last question I'm going to ask you is, I think a lot of people ask that we talk to, and it's trying to navigate which boat engine type is best for them. And that's at the heart of this issue.
Yeah.
And I know that it's not a clear answer because it's not a one size fits all. Like everybody that walks into our doors and we talk to, we're not going to say like, you belong in an inboard.
Right.
You belong in an outboard. You belong in an inboard outboard. So when that question is asked to you, like, man, Randy, which one's best for me? What is your answer to that?
Yeah. So first off, it's probably asking them a lot of questions on how they're going to use the boat.
Yeah.
But first off, let's start with an inboard. If people spend most of their time behind the boat and they want to surf and they're very active water sports enthusiasts, they're probably looking at an inboard.
That's a good point.
If we're talking about an outboard, typically we're looking at pontoon boats or we're looking at center consoles.
Yeah.
And yes, they can do water sports. They're definitely coming with bigger engines, 400s, 450s.
They're capable.
They're capable, 100%. However, based on the actual boat itself, you're going to find them, we'll say, 90 or 95% on a pontoon boat compared to the inboard outboard.
Yeah.
And of course, they don't make inboards on a pontoon boat.
Right. Exactly. So you're saying if you're looking for more of a kind of living room on the water experience, maybe moving towards an outboard would be kind of...
Yes, you could say a pontoon boat is that living room experience. However, they have completely changed the mindset of what a pontoon is with the tri-tunes, the bigger engines, and becoming an all-sports boat.
Yeah.
It's really just limited to the surfing and then also the shape of the wave behind it. When we talk about the inboard outboard, that's where it's an application based too, where typically you find those on taller, deeper, bigger boats. So you're going to find it on the bigger cobalts where they're going out on big water like Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
And
in our case, Lake Michigan.
In our case, Lake Michigan could be the ocean. And you're going to find it to have a different style of ride.
Right. Because they're bigger, deeper, taller boats is what you're going to find them on.
Correct. And they are now transitioning those on outboards too, where those bigger, taller, deeper boats have 2, 3, 4 outboards on the back.
Yeah. And you could still do water sports with an IO, but it's just probably not as great of an experience as an inboard.
Yes. And it just comes back to what the wave is behind the boat and the wash behind the boat. But we have a lot of customers who love tubing behind outboard pontoon boats and will ski behind them. It just comes back to what is that percentage of your use?
Yeah.
And then also the last thing would be to talk about is just the lake itself. If you are on a super shallow lake, that's where that outboard might make sense.
Yeah.
With having the ability to do some of the water sports.
Yeah.
And it's just something to be aware of
Right.
when you're talking about or looking at what boat you want to purchase.
So if I'm hearing you right on that last point, if you're asking yourself, man, which boat engine type is going to be best for me, and you're going to have to deal with trimming of any capacity because your lake is maybe shallow, that's when you'd probably want to think long and hard about possibly an outboard or possibly an inboard outboard. But maybe an inboard might not be the best option because you don't get that trimmability.
Correct. And I would say, of course, that the one that's going to go up the highest is going to be your outboard.
Yeah.
You literally
trim up the highest.
Correct. You can trim that completely out of the water on most boats with them.
Yeah.
Where when you're looking at an inboard, outboard, and an inboard, typically they're going to be very similar in how much water they need to use in order to be in the water.
Right.
We call it draft.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all really, really, really good stuff, Randy. And I think kind of a pro tip, and I don't say this just because I work in the industry, but I think that honestly the dealership plays a huge role in helping you understand what boat is best for you. Go into that a little bit.
Yeah, so when somebody comes in here, we don't go and just start showing them boats.
Right.
We want to learn about their family, who's using it, how they're using it, what lake they plan on boating on, and try to help them buy the right tool for how they're going to boat.
Yeah.
And that's where just educating yourself on the 3 different styles of drive systems and different styles of boats will help you have a better experience and hopefully have the right boat.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I've seen people walk in here fully thinking they're going to get a pontoon boat. And then they walk out knowing that, wow, an inboard actually might make sense. And I'm sure you've experienced that too.
Yeah, 100%. Or they come in thinking the inboard is the answer, and then they realize a tri-tune answers them a lot better where, hey, it's easier to get on, and I can still do water sports, and I don't plan on surfing.
Another thing I think that people should consider when they're asking themselves which boat engine type is best for me is on outboards, and we find many pontoons having outboard engines. Not even so much the engine type at this point, but the pontoon itself, I think, is really easy to get onto. And compared to an IO or an inboard at times. Would you say that's true?
I would. If you look at a pontoon boat and how it's designed, especially with the brand we sell, it has a very big platform off the back. So if you have anyone that's a little bit fragile, has a hard time walking, it's literally docked to stepping on the back of the boat.
Yeah, right.
And you have something you can grab as well.
Right, like that little railing.
Correct. And even with that being said, you'll find even inboard outboards that have that same style where you step on the platform and they'll have a walkway through the side.
Right, that's true. Yep, and I do know that is something to consider when you're looking at boats. It's not even about the boat engine at that point. It's about, the boat itself, and maybe the engine is secondary at that.
For sure. And part of that walkthrough or that setup is based on the engine. So Essentially, that's why it allows you to get on the boat easier, because that outboard is hanging off the back of the boat
Right.
and not sitting over top of the sun deck, which makes it, of course, harder to get in.
Right, absolutely. Awesome. Randy, thanks so much, man. It was a pleasure talking to you. You're so knowledgeable on this stuff. If you guys have any other questions about this topic specifically, feel free to reach out to us, subscribe to us, comment. We'll be sure to get back to you. Otherwise, give any of our stores a call, and they'll be happy to help you out as well. Otherwise, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you on the water.